Welcome back to the podcast that exists to enrich and inspire young Latinos.
Bienvenidos al podcast que existe para enriquecer e inspirar a jóvenes latinos. La alegría del evangelio. Leslie.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing today?
Hey, everyone. It's Jay. Glad that you guys are able to join us again. We're really excited for today's conversation.
Y hoy tenemos una voz diferente, la voz de...
Oh, hello, everybody. My name is Marcos Martinez.
Hoy tenemos a Marcos como invitado. Estaremos hablando de, yo creo que algo que es bastante importante para la nación en la cual estamos, los Estados Unidos. Estamos pasando por una transición de gobierno, pero también estamos pasando por momentos de mucha división. Y en el día de hoy estaremos hablando de cómo nosotros, como personas de fe, necesitamos jugar un papel activo en lo que está sucediendo, cómo podemos colaborar para que estas cosas mejoren. Y para comenzar la conversación, me gustaría mencionar una de las frases famosas de Martin Luther King Jr., que acabamos de celebrar su día, ¿verdad? Que dice que solo el amor puede hacer que los enemigos se conviertan en amigos. ¿Qué piensan de eso, muchachos?
Well, I'll go ahead and start and just say that thank you guys for having me and that I'm happy to be here. And I think it's beautiful just because it's like really the root of what the gospel is, right? And it's a love story. And so I think that the power of love is able to do great things and be able to transform people's hearts. And that, yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, I think it's something that really resonates with me, especially today. We're recording this right after the inauguration, and I was watching on YouTube earlier Mitch McConnell addressing the Senate, and it was only like a little 3-minute speech, but it kind of surprised me to see how like excited he seemed to be to work with President Biden. And at one point he says, I'm excited to work with my friend. And I was like, well, this is something, and like, he seems excited. The whole nation seems excited. I'm excited. I'm like super happy about like this next chapter that we're in. And I just think that, yeah, like, a lot of people see each other as enemies, and now it's hopefully going to change and we're going to start to see each other as friends.
I mean, we all know that God is love. So I think just throwing the word love around is very important, especially after a time and an era where I feel like love was just not present. Ever since November, when we saw people going to the polls and voting, and then slowly seeing Biden take the lead, we saw different people out there on the streets really showing how excited they were. And that's where we saw love, where all these people were able to come together and celebrate something in unity. We haven't seen that in a while for many reasons, but it's nice that in the past few weeks, past few months, we've been able to see that love come back. And I mean, this is definitely a fresh start. So I am also very excited to see kind of where our country goes from here.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that, Jay. Today in the inauguration, and the new president said something that said, if you disagree with me, that doesn't make you my enemy. If you disagree with me, we shouldn't go to war because of it. And I believe that it is, hemos pasado momentos en los que cuando sabes que una persona no está de acuerdo contigo, evitas tener una conversación, evitas tener una conversación profunda, ¿verdad? Sobre lo que nos afecta como sociedad. Y creo que eso al final del día daña al país, ¿verdad? No poder conversar con tus amigos sobre lo que piensas, no poder conversar con tus amigos sobre estos asuntos importantes para nosotros. Y yo creo que nosotros como católicos, ¿verdad? Estamos muchas veces en la mitad. Como, híjole, pues, ¿para dónde le doy? ¿Para la derecha o para la izquierda? O yo quiero meterle el gol por en medio. Y nos encontramos como, no soy ni de aquí ni de allá. Y yo creo que pensando esto como dos extremos, la izquierda y la derecha, yo creo que en la mitad hay un espacio gris bastante grande, ¿verdad? Donde yo creo que muchos nos gustaría decir, yo estoy ahí. Y creo que la mayoría de la gente busca soluciones de common sense. ¿Qué piensan de eso?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more just in terms of the idea of, the media and what we might see on social media portraying these like extreme polar opposites of the political spectrum, and that the majority of people that you have everyday conversations with find themselves somewhere in that gray area in the middle, trying to make sense of what's going on on the political extremes. And I think that the ability to be able to listen to people and having patience, being able to sit with somebody who disagrees with you a little bit is something that is going to be a changing factor in us being able to progress as a nation, as a society, being able to find common ground with other people and eventually be able to lead to some progressive political movements.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to realize that a lot more things join us than separate us, right? We have a lot more in common than we do different from each other. To quote MLK again, I found this quote that I really liked that said, "We may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now." And I remember hearing that a lot a couple years ago when Trump became president, and how people were like hoping for him to fail. And then there was people saying, well, why would you want the captain of our ship to fail? And I was just like, yeah, makes sense, right? Like, why would you hope for his downfall? Same thing now, right? Now that Biden is president, he addressed those people that didn't vote for him, right? And I thought that was really cool. He said, you know, I'm working not only for those that voted for me, but just as much and just as hard for those that didn't vote for me. And right. And I hope that you guys will put aside whatever differences we have and realize that, hey, we're all in this together. If the ship goes down, we're all going down together. It's not half and half. We're one country united under God.
Yeah, I mean, I think going along with something that Marco said about kind of the disagreements and stuff, I think a lot of us forget that, one, not every disagreement needs a reaction. And we've seen a lot of that lately and a lot of reactions. And it's normal when you're upset and when something's kind of different to the opinion that you have in your head, you feel the need to voice that reaction. But sometimes like you don't need that immediately. So I think especially now it's important to like take a break and like, yeah, maybe you're not agreeing with everything that everyone is saying around you and your leaders are saying to you, but give them a second, because at the end of the day, like differences call for great things. Like I am a true believer of like yin and yang, like opposites like can attract. So if everyone thought the same way and everyone's opinion was the same, we would get nowhere. Great things have come from differences and just listening to each other's opinions and not having that reaction. It's amazing that our country has so many different opinions, but they're really worth nothing if we don't all learn to stop and listen to the opinions that differ from ours. That is, I mean, at the end of the day, that's how we learn. I remember learning about Mother Teresa a while back, and words of her that like kind of resonated with me was, I can do things you cannot, and you can do things that I cannot. And together we can do great things. Like I said, opinions are different, but if we learn from each other's opinions, I mean, we're all going to grow.
Yeah, I really love that Mother Teresa always throws wisdom into the conversation.
Yes.
My love and respect for a great saint. To throw a little bit of in the conversation, kind of something that has been in our minds is that, you know, masks earlier last year were politicized, right? And then with mask being politicized, vaccines were politicized, right? So it became they became political statements. It was no longer about me. It was no longer about my health and everybody's around me's health. It was just, I'm going to make a political statement. And when we look at ourselves as Christian, you know, wearing, I don't like wearing a mask. It's uncomfortable. But when I see Christ in the cross, you know, he made that big of a sacrifice for all of us to have eternal life, right? Yet, we are not willing to be a little uncomfortable in wearing a mask, right? It's sad that we have over 400,000 people that have died. You know, many of them friends and family of us here. This pandemic has not been easy for anybody. I think all of us have to be part of the solution. But my point here is, it's so sad that very basic things that are good for everybody become political statements. I don't know what you guys think on that subject.
I guess I can offer a little bit of perspective, because I wouldn't say that I had too much of an opinion one way or the other on the vaccine and the questions that were raised upon that. And obviously with the mask, I didn't think that should have been politicized. I think it's pretty just basic logic and science, and just for public safety. But getting to the point of these two things kind of being politicized, I think gets into the discussion of like the social discourse that we have today and how we consume media either through TV or through social media, and how the past couple of years during the Trump administration there had been this culture of disinformation and not trusting certain sources or whatever it may be. And I think it was harmful in the sense of there's these set of facts that people aren't necessarily willing to trust or wanting to tailor facts to fit their agenda in some way, shape, or form. And I've been trying to do a better job of trying to understand that. And I think be that example that we're talking about and be empathetic to people who may see things and not think less of them if they have a disagreement about masks or vaccines or whatever, anything that has been politicized now. And I think it's a chance for us to be empathetic to people about how their versions of media might be different than ours, and what they consume and see, and what forces them to believe in. And it's also probably if we disagree, then on us to be educated about it and to be able to have a discourse, if someone's willing to. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about.
I think it has to do a lot with the divide and the hate, right, among people in the country and along party lines specifically, right? So a lot of people think that one side versus the other is pro-mask, pro-vaccine, and the other is anti-mask, anti-vaccine. And then they kind of just side with their own parties. And then they're not even willing to look at the facts, right? Or maybe the facts that aren't necessarily facts. Like you were saying, Marcos, there's been a lot of fake news. I think that's the word you were trying to say. There's been a lot of fake news out there. And it's hard for us to distinguish what's true and what's not. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I wanted to make sure I did was educate myself on the subjects, right? Like, what does wearing a mask actually do? I found that out. Okay, it does help. It prevents, if you're wearing a mask and I'm wearing a mask, there's like 90% chance that neither one of us is going to catch COVID from each other. And the vaccine, how effective is it? What is it made of? What's in it? I went and I did my little research, and I think that now that I've educated myself a little bit on it, I see why it's a good thing. Whereas before, I was kind of like, well, we don't know. People have been saying that this was made really quickly. Do we trust it? Do we trust these people? What if they're lying to us? Everybody thinks that the government's trying to put trackers in us and all this stuff, right? And I think it's a lot to do with divide and then just the lack of education, right, that a lot of people have. And I think that falls on us when we don't try to learn and try to educate ourselves more. Specifically, speaking as a Catholic, right? I think it's very important to realize that as Catholics, that does not mean that we're anti-science. Complete opposite, right? We're pro-science, right? Some of the best scientists in history and the first ones to advance scientific studies were Catholics, popes that recruited priests, Jesuits, everything to advance science. And we should listen to it because it's there for a reason. It's good for us. It helps us, right? Medical studies and medical professionals are only there for our own benefit. And I think if we're ignoring them and what they have worked their entire lives to show us and instead trust a news anchor that knows nothing on the subject, well, then that's kind of on us, right? And at that point, it's just a matter of you need to educate yourself and be smart and make smart decisions.
I agree that I don't think any of this should have been politicized, but unfortunately, it became so. And then I know Jay brought up the other side of it of kind of Catholics. We're Catholics. What do we believe? Should we wear the mask? Should we not? As a Catholic, I've been wearing a mask. I didn't want to. I still remember the first day that in my town, it became kind of a mandate and I refused to wear it because I was like, it's so weird. I look weird. I still wore it, but I didn't want to. And to think that months later, we're still wearing them and they're more important than ever in helping slow down the spread. But I guess I always thought of it as it's uncomfortable. People just don't like to wear them. I never really viewed it as it's political or not until I think after a few weeks of wearing them, people just decided it was a statement to make. And it's sad to think that, but I mean, sadly, like I said, that's what it's come to. But I didn't think of this being also a religious kind of from a religious standpoint until I came across a lady, came into my job and did not have a mask. And I remember that she saw the cross because I always have a little cross necklace, and she pointed it out and said, well, Jesus did not wear a mask. I remember going home to my mom and being like, this lady told me that Jesus didn't wear a mask. I was like, how is that even a valid point to make, to not wear a mask? And my mom like looked at me and she was like, well, I'm pretty sure we can all agree Jesus would have worn a mask. And that's where we come back to the point of like, Jesus was on a cross for us. Like that, a mask is nothing to that amount of sacrifice. And that's where we have to think of, we have to sacrifice something for not just ourselves, but for the health and well-being of others. And if a mask and a vaccine is what needs to be done, then that's a small sacrifice that I am willing to make personally. And I think we should all be willing to put in that little bit for others.
Yeah, I think to see Jesus in the cross, it puts it into perspective, right? I can make a little sacrifice for others. Just 2 comments. The first is, people are afraid that government are going to put trackers on us. Newsflash, and this is not fake news. Do you have a cell phone? Is this cell phone a smartphone? It has like 10 microphones, 3 cameras. Yeah, they've been listening to you. They are watching you. Don't worry about tracking in your body. You carry it. If you don't find it in 5 minutes, you go crazy. If anybody is going to listen to you or see you, it's going to be through your phone, right? I think we need to put that into perspective. And then, you bring a very interesting point of view in saying a Catholic's pro-science. And we need to remember that science is one of the gifts from the Holy Spirit that we receive in our holy confirmation, right? And the idea is that science is the gift of understanding the creation of God. Because of the gift of science, we are able to understand creation. Because we are able to understand creation, we are able to understand a piece of the Creator. Understanding that at the end of the day, he will continue to be a mystery. But now that I'm talking about Jesus, and just going back to a little bit about what you said, Marcos, is very hard to be a peacemaker. It's very hard to be the one that says, I don't agree with you, but I don't have to hate you. I don't have to dismiss you like crazy or ignorant because you don't think like me. And we have to understand that people are consuming different sources of media and facts, right? One of the beatitudes is blessed be the peacemakers, because they will be called children of God. In a world that is divided, I think the new president is calling all of us to be peacemakers. Where do we start? Because we certainly have friends, family that we don't agree with in our political views. Does that mean that we have to dismiss them or make them our enemies? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think it's actually a really interesting subject, especially when it comes to family, because I think especially the past 2 election cycles have caused people to see political divides in their immediate and extended families, and it's uncomfortable because we always feel justified in our own beliefs and that we're right, and that how could you even see that this way or think about that this way, and it's interesting. Then it's like, okay, well, now are you family or are you like political opponents? Like do you have to make enemies out of the ones you disagree with? And that's where it kind of gets real for people. It's like, okay, well, now this is somebody that like I love no matter what, but is it and we talked about mentioning the idea of us being in, like, from the Catholic perspective of not labeling ourselves as Democrats, Republicans, or liberals or conservatives. Like, we're supposed to be Catholic first, and it is really hard to follow that example of Christ and being forgiving and being a peacemaker, because it takes a person to swallow their pride, in a sense, and let go of the idea of having to be right. And I think in our culture now, on both sides of the political spectrum, there's this obsession with being right and letting other people know that you were right and how right you were. And then when it's proven and shown, now I get to dunk on you about it because, I was right back then and you're still wrong, And so I think that it's a call for us to kind of reflect on our views and why we have them, and maybe, like I had mentioned earlier, being empathetic to people who see things differently, and try to even if you don't want it all to agree, that's perfectly fine, but to understand how somebody can get there, how their socioeconomic background or upbringing may have them to believe something. And then if you care so much about what you do care about, if you're willing to be able to have a civil discourse with that person about why you see things differently.
Yeah, I think being a peacemaker is extremely hard, right? And it's not anything that any one of us is just going to be great at off the bat. But I do think, thankfully, we have examples, right? And I want to share some of them with you guys, with our listeners. The first being St. Thomas More. So St. Thomas More lived in the 15th and 16th century, at the turn of the century. And he, as a child, wanted to be a priest, and his dad wouldn't let him, right? He told him that he had to go and study law because that's what his dad did. So he went to law school and became a lawyer. And, always kept in the back of his mind, or rather in the front of his mind, that he was Catholic before he was anything else. And, as he progressed through his career in law, he was elected to Parliament in England and eventually became Speaker of Parliament, right? So he had a very, very high political seat. But throughout his whole career in politics, never faded from his Catholic morals and from his Catholic upbringing, and always made sure to fight for the little people, right, that couldn't fight for themselves. He tried to be a peacemaker, right, as best he could, and kind of really, like we mentioned earlier, rode and lived in that gray area in between the parties, right? And at one point in his political career, King Henry, who I'm hoping some of you guys know his story, King Henry, right, wanted to divorce his wife because he had a mistress, and wrote to the Pope that he wanted an annulment, and the Pope refused. And then this is when King Henry just decided that his whole country of England was just going to leave the Roman Catholic Church, and he was going to start his own church in England. So this starts this huge separation in the church that still exists today, right, with all these different branches of Christianity that we have. And all the bishops in England, out of just fear of King Henry, just were like, okay, we're just going to go with you. We're not going to fight it because why? You have the power and you have everything. We're just going to go with you. And Thomas More, right, as being Speaker of the House, someone with immense political influence, was like, no, you know what? No, I'm not gonna now acknowledge you as the Pope of the Church of England. You're King Henry, and you and I have been friends for a long time, so I respect you. But that doesn't mean that I have to agree with the decisions that you're making, right? And I think that's a huge part of what being a peacemaker is even if you disagree with somebody, you still show them the respect and the kindness that they deserve. And then you try to continue to fight for what you believe for, and that's exactly what he did throughout the rest of his life. And then another person that I want to share with you guys is Dorothy Day, who was a political revolutionary in the U.S. in the early 1900s. So, she was somebody that started off as a member of the Communist Party and, didn't believe in God and in Catholicism. And throughout her life really started to be drawn to the faith, right? And became a devout Catholic, and was somebody that was just constantly fighting for those that couldn't fight for themselves, right? She was at protests and, just marches and all these kind of things, fighting for women's rights, really worked for social change. And she was somebody that at the same time, just like Thomas More, never swayed from her Catholic upbringing and never gave herself a label before the label of Catholic, right? She was Catholic before she was anything else. And one of her biggest contributions to the world was starting a Catholic newspaper. It's called The Catholic Worker, which aimed to teach Catholic social teachings, not only to the masses and to normal lay people, but to a lot of the clergy of her time, right? She helped to educate a lot of people that were in power in the church on how they should continue to fight for people, to join labor strikes, to join women's rights strikes and marches, and really spreading that love of the gospel and how, under the eyes of God, we're all equal and we're all the same. And she was another amazing example of what it is to be a peacemaker and what it is to really hold your Catholic values before anything else. And I guess just lastly, I'm sure most of us mention that President Biden is a Catholic, right? And I think as Catholics, we should hold him up to that standard, right? Make sure that he remembers that, hey, you're a Catholic before you're a politician. And we understand that you've had a long career in politics, but we hope that you won't forget where you came from, and you won't forget the God that you serve. Because just as much as you serve the people of this country, you serve God that we know watches over this beautiful country of ours.
When people hear peacemaker, it's, I don't know, from different kind of comments I've heard just the past, I think people look at it as like a weakness. Like for you to be peacemaker, it means weakness. It means you're, shutting yourself down just to kind of make sure that the waters don't go all crazy and you're, calming the waters. But in reality, I think Marco's touched on it a little bit, I'm pretty sure, of, setting your pride aside. Because at the end of the day, if you're with your loved ones, people who you are sure that you agree with 100%, and something comes up where there is this divide, the peacemaker isn't the one that settles for whatever he needs to settle for just to make sure that nothing goes crazy. The peacemaker is the one that can set aside his pride, set aside his opinions to make sure that, again, the peace is kept. And I think it's like I mentioned before, I think everyone has this thing where they just want their opinion to be heard. And that gets in the way of allowing yourself to be the peacemaker. And we should all be striving to be the peacemaker in those situations where things get out of control and the reaction gets out of control. So I think this is a great time to start really rethinking what it means to bring peace. It's not an opportunity for yourself to just lay back and settle. It's an opportunity for you to rethink the strategy of which you're sharing your point of view in a way that will allow others to still share that respect and, most importantly, that love with each other.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that our point of view are not facts, right? An opinion is your opinion. An opinion is an opinion. And I think a lot of us become very full of ourselves, very selfish, because we start the blurring lines of esta es mi opinión y estos son los hechos, y debemos de entender que nuestra opinión es la interpretación de los hechos, pero no son los hechos. Y si alguien tiene una interpretación diferente, debemos de respetarla. Mira, tenemos 3 evangelios, los evangelios sinópticos en la Biblia, ¿verdad? Que son 3 narraciones diferentes de los mismos hechos de la vida de Jesús, que son Mateo, Lucas y Marcos, ¿no? No es que uno está bien y el otro está mal, es que son 3 ojos, ¿verdad? 3 set of eyes que estaban mirando a la vida de Jesús y estaban entendiéndola de cierta manera desde sus experiencias. Y yo creo que, de veras, quiero hacer eco a lo que dices tú, Marcos, y lo que dices, Leslie, es de que siempre lo más fácil es apuntar. Es decir, tú tienes la culpa, tú eres el culpable. Siempre, y es mucho más fácil criticar, ¿verdad? Hasta en nuestra propia vida, cuando pasa algo, ¿verdad? Nunca queremos ser las personas que toman responsabilidad y decir, no, yo tengo responsabilidad sobre esto. Siempre queremos hacer a alguien culpable, ¿no? Y pasa lo mismo en nuestra perspectiva política. Yo creo que nosotros, en tomar responsabilidad por nuestras propias acciones, en tomar responsabilidad por nuestras propias opiniones y entender nuestras opiniones no como los hechos, sino como opiniones. Otra cosa que me gustaría hablar es, en la Biblia, está esos teams de chaos and order, ¿verdad? El caos y el orden, ¿no? Y si leemos el Génesis, al principio del Génesis, nos vamos a dar cuenta que la narración empieza como había caos y Dios empieza a ordenar el caos, ¿verdad? Empieza a crear. Y yo sí quiero resaltar de que si no somos capaces de lo que tú decías, Jay, de entender que estamos en el mismo barco, muy fácilmente podemos regresar al caos, ¿verdad? La democracia es frágil. Y yo creo que la importancia para el orden es la importancia de tener conversaciones con personas que pueden estar interpretando los hechos de una manera diferente, ¿no? Entonces, mi pregunta o lo que les quisiera preguntar es, en este mundo de caos y orden, ¿no? ¿Cómo nosotros nos convertimos en personas que son parte del orden, que traen orden, ¿verdad?, al mundo y no caos, ¿no? Somos las personas que somos peacemakers y no chismosos. Tenemos orden, no caos. Y como parte de esto es tomar responsabilidad, no apuntar el dedo y tomar responsabilidad de nuestras propias acciones. Y para decir un poco lo contrario que tú dijiste es no llenarnos de pride, sino de ser humildes. Ser humildes Y qué difícil es ser humilde. A mí no me gusta ser humilde. Pero si no somos humildes, pronto podemos llegar al caos, ¿no?
I kind of like to think about this topic through the lens of a topic that I care about a lot is like social media consumption and I mean media consumption in general. The negative stories get more clicks, sell more, and just get more attention. Defamation, right? If there's a celebrity and they have a fall from grace, those are the stories that people like to follow. And I think it's because it's something where that person gets humble, like a point a finger to that person and their fall from grace, and they're like, they're like me, and but or maybe we want to point them in that they're even worse than me, and that helps like boost ourselves sometimes. And I think what's the more difficult thing to do is see these people who are in the spotlight or whatever, and you see a negative story and to think, well, I could have made that same mistake. Like they deserve compassion and forgiveness. Like we don't know what was going on. And that's not our natural instinct to think that way, because we just kind of our pride or the way we see things. Sometimes we want to put other people down to make us feel better about ourselves, or that, hey, if we were in their shoes, we would do a better job, And I think that's, like you said, it's really hard to look at that and be humble and like, I could have made that same mistake. Like, poor guy, or what, like this young person on TV, like they don't know any better, and we don't want to be empathetic and understanding of other people's situations. And I think that is a huge part into, creating progress and being a more unified society. Is just like the willingness to understand each other and to want to show compassion and have forgiveness for other people and their mistakes.
Yeah, Marco, something that I was thinking while the whole time that you were just talking was, I feel like by acting more like Christ, we can accomplish exactly what you're talking about. And exactly that answers Vicente's question too, right? How do we try to create order out of chaos? Well, I feel like Jesus, right, when he came across people, he made an effort to make them feel important and to make them feel like they had value and like they mattered, like they had dignity. I feel like when we come across people nowadays that, like you were saying, like with a celebrity, right, we try to put them down. We do the exact opposite, right? You're less than me. You're not human. You're trash. You're this. You're that. We don't show love. We don't show compassion. We don't try to give people the dignity that they rightfully deserve just because they're human and because they're God's creation. And I think if we tried to do that, that would be a huge step in being a peacemaker, a huge step in creating order. And it's really difficult to do. And I say it from my own experiences, right? Trying to really create a connection with everyone that you meet, whether it's somebody that you only talk to once a day. I mean, that's actually a lot. Somebody you talk to once a month, once a week, once a day. Or even somebody that you'll never see again, right? But to make them feel like they mattered to you for whatever amount of time that you were in front of them, right? As somebody that works with the public in my job, I see people a lot. There's people that I might see once a month. There's people I might see once a year and I never see them again. I always try to be as kind as I possibly can, right? No matter how that person is to me. Sometimes people are having a bad day and they might take it out on me. Sometimes maybe people that are just like that and they just take it out on you. But I always like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I try to make people feel love from me and whatever that means to them, right? But I just try to make people feel like, you know what, that guy was nice and he cared about me and all he did was some little thing, right? And I feel like if we're able to do that for each other, no matter how small, that is a huge step towards making peace and creating order. It's something that we should do not to be liked, not because we want people to like us, but because we want them to feel like they matter and that they have a voice and that they're not just some low life, some trash, right? That they have dignity. I think that's something that the church has always taught, but doesn't put enough focus on, right? How much we should really just love each other, and how love really just is the answer to the majority of our problems, but we're just not willing to see it.
You said like not doing all of that because people should like us. And I completely agree with that. And I think now it's even more important to go through that extra measure so that to gain the trust. I think right now there's a lack of trust in our country, and that's why there's such a big divide. And times are chaotic right now. So it's it's a difficult journey for, yes, the new president to gain the trust and calm the waters. But I think for all of us who have to, like, I also work with the public and see so many people, it's also a challenge for the everyday person to learn how to interact with the other everyday person. Martin Luther King said that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of convenience and comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Like I said, right now, people are on edge and there is no trust. So yes, it might have been easier for all of us to talk politics, talk really any conversation, have any type of conversation in a previous time where maybe, social media isn't involved, where we can all just be so, attentive to everything that's happening, even whether it's fake or not. But the truth of the matter is this is not convenient times and this is not comforting times. This is very chaotic times and it's scary times. So I hope that the president can somehow gain our trust and we can all focus on that. But I hope that we can also try to gain the trust of our fellow neighbor. And that way, I think that's a great way to start the healing that our country kind of needs right now.
Yeah, thank you everybody for that. That was great. Last round of thoughts. I want to bring up the devil. Que miedo. Nos asusten. So the devil actually means divider, right? The divider. And I think my family, like when we think about family issues, we think about divisions, right? We think about divorcio, we think about family separation, what happens and what happened in the border to the children. So like all these divisions that hurt people, right? And the devil is literally is the divider in chief. And many times we become dividers in our families. We become dividers in our friends. For the purpose of this conversation, we become dividers in our country, in our society, in our community, right? Like speaking from the Iskali perspective, there's always that one person in the communities that is causing trouble, that is cause of division, that is cause of chisme, right? Everything again goes back to imitating Jesus is hard. Being a peacemaker is hard, but being a divider is so easy. So like it's easier to imitate the devil than imitating Jesus. And just where do we start? Saying, I'm not gonna be a divider in chief. I'm not gonna be the cause of division. I'm gonna be the cause of peace. And how do we start as young people? How do we start as Latinos? How do we start as Catholics? Bam. What do you guys think?
I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say.
All right, I'm going to start from the point of view of a young person. And I think that as a young person and talking to a lot of other people around my age when it comes to society and like our political world, I feel like divide is easy because we're uneducated, right? And ask a lot of people what they think about this, what they think about that. This law, that law, politician, that politician, and they're just like, oh, I don't like them. Well, why? Oh, because I saw this post on Facebook that somebody shared that they did something bad, but I don't know what they actually did. And, I don't know nothing about them, but I'm going off something that I saw on my social media, which, like you were mentioning earlier, Marcos, is maybe tailored to exactly what you search for, right? Whether that be left or right or middle, whatever it is. I think young people need to really make sure that they educate themselves above all, and that's going to be something that leads to dramatic growth when it comes to our politics. And I know, talking to a lot of friends, that this past election, a lot of them knew who was on the ballot for president and maybe their local senator representative. And then after that, they didn't know anything. And there was 30 other things that you had to vote for. And they just kind of went in and were like, let me pick the coolest sounding name. And, you just go through whatever. And I'm guilty of that too. I've done it in the past. And I really was like, I'm wasting my vote, if I'm doing that. And I was really like, I need to make sure that I'm prepared to do this properly. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it if you're not going to do it right. And I really wanted to make sure that before I went and looked through it. So I actually, conveniently, right, there was a lot of mail-in ballots that we had this year because of COVID. So I requested a mail-in just to look at it, and I looked at it and I looked through everybody. And so when I went to vote in person, I already knew who was on there and I had already looked up the people. And I was like, okay, just went in, bam, 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 and I was ready to go. And for the first time, I felt good coming out of a polling place because I actually knew what I was voting for. And I didn't just feel like I wasted my vote. And I think that that's something that so many of us do. And it's a great place to start as young people. And, you can only go up from there. There's plenty of other things we can branch off, but I think it's a really good place to start. And it's something that we can do easily if we really try.
Thanks for sharing that. I kind of keep coming back to this idea of, social media and like media consumption, and how that I think plays into this culture of being divisive. And like I said, there's this righteousness, like the desire to be right, no matter what side or, however you land on that spectrum, to be right and to let the people who are wrong know about it, and because it's just so much easier. I mean, me personally, for anybody who knows me personally, I have a very like sarcastic tone, and it's so much easier for me to like have a dig that brings you down than for me to say like, oh, you have a nice smile. I don't know if that's just a personal thing, but it's just like an anecdote to show that it is sometimes easier to be divisive than to bring people together. So I think when we come to the discussion of like, then how do we address that, right? How do we not have so much in terms of like division and negativity and all that kind of stuff? And I definitely struggle with that question a little bit, but I look at our media consumption, especially social media in our generation of younger people, and even, older people who are consuming social media as well. And this level of anxiety and stress that we all seem to have as we just like could keep consuming all this negative media attention and these divisive stories and all this attention. And like, if asking ourselves, like, is this healthy? Is this where we want to be as a society? Or do we want to take the onus to kind of take back our mental health in the sense of like, let me, start reading things that educate me, or listen to something that is going to talk about positivity, and, consuming different sources of media to get a better understanding of different viewpoints and a wider range of voices to be able to understand different people and where they're coming from. And I think if we're willing to make the conscious effort to build better, healthier habits that we want to see in our lives and in the lives of our neighbors, right? It is kind of making the conscious effort to turn away from some of the media that we consume and the negative stories, and start to implement like positive habits, positive voices in our daily routines.
Yes, agree. Because you have to make that conscious effort of, I have to do something, because at the end of the day, we're in a time right now where if you do nothing, that's equally as bad as you doing bad. And I like that Jay brought up being educated, because I was going to bring that up, because this is the first year where I worked as an election judge at the polls. And I did the same thing. So I was sitting at the table, and people that would request the, paper ballot, I was looking at the copies of the paper ballot to be like, oh, wow, like there's a lot of names on here. And I was shocked at how many names I did not know, because I am guilty. Like I looked up like, a lot of like the major judges, obviously like the president, senators, things like that. But then it gets down to, there's a lot of people that I didn't know. I realized that it's very important to educate yourself, because a lot of the people that were going in to vote would go in there, circle like one thing and then hand it back. I was thinking that they had, like, if you messed up and you're requesting a new one. And a lot of people are like, I'm done. I just want to vote for the president and that's it. And I'm like, no, that's where we get back to, doing nothing is like, it's still bad. I don't know. I guess this election really like brought up the whole thing of educating yourself and knowing, what you're voting for. But aside from the election, kind of know what you're doing in your everyday life. Yeah, the devil is division, and you can cause division by not educating yourself and not knowing what you're doing.
Well, thank you everybody for being with us today. I think we give you some food for thought. I want to end this podcast with this powerful quote, and it's of somebody that had to maneuver, had to bring literally two peoples together, had to bring almost two worlds together, and that person is Nelson Mandela. who suffered in prison for 27 years. And he says this about peacemaking. He said, when we dehumanize and demonize our opponents, we abandon the possibility of peacefully resolving our differences and seek to justify violence against them. So, es fácil deshumanizar y pensar de las otras personas como demonios. Y si hacemos eso, we can justify violence, ¿verdad? Podemos justificar la violencia. Creo que la violencia no es la solución. Lo miramos la semana pasada, no es la solución. Invitamos a todas las personas que nos escuchan a que se enamoren de la alegría del Evangelio y sean unos peacemakers y sepan que nuestra fe nos inspira siempre a ser colaboradores del orden y la paz en el mundo. Tomen responsabilidad de sus acciones. Gracias por estar aquí. Despídanse, muchachos. Final thoughts.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. A fresh start for our country and for everyone individually. So, love each other. Spread the love.
Thank you guys for joining us this week. I hope that you guys were able to take something from this conversation that we had. Remember to be a peacemaker, because God is going to have a special place for people that are peacemakers.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you guys for having me as a guest. Spread love. Love yourself. Love your family. And love your neighbors.
No olviden seguirnos en Instagram y en Facebook en Iskali Podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Iskali Podcast.
Listen with us and experience the joy of the gospel.
Escúchanos y experimenta la alegría del Evangelio. Te esperamos.
Dare to dream.
Atrévete a soñar.